Welcome to another RSR. Tonight we are making our predictions. I'm making my predictions for the 2023 Canadian Championship, the 2023 Voyageurs Cup. It's going to be an interesting video, predicting the whole tournament. This is the only predictions I'll do for the tournament until the final, probably. Maybe I'll do a final preview, depending on how things turn out. Not completely sure, but I'll look back at the schedule and see how it turns. But for now, all these predictions are the predictions. Let's see how we do at the end of the tournament. We'll go from match 1 to 6. So basically west to east, up and down, of course, each way. So we'll start with match 1 of the tournament in the west region, the northern region of the bracket, the way they printed it. TSS Rovers FC, the winners of League One BC, versus Valor FC of the Canadian Premier League. I think Valor, even though they just started their season, but last season they were at best. To me personally, I think at best for a Canadian Premier League side is probably still good enough to beat a League One Canada side. So for me right now, I think Valor will do enough to get past. They are away. They are going to British Columbia for this tie. They are away. But again, for me personally, if Valor doesn't get this done, what does that say about their season for the rest of it, right? What does it say? I think they'll get it done. They'll go through. They'll get to the quarterfinal. Last year, they got eliminated in the preliminary round by Vancouver. But they went to Vancouver and lost. But, yeah, that was the preliminary round. Then York. I think it was the preliminary round. But they did get eliminated by Vancouver. That's the correct part. If I wasn't correct about preliminary. But, yeah, Valor Pacific, York. Then Toronto. Yeah, preliminary round. Had to make sure I was right. Match 2, speaking of Pacific, Pacific FC versus Calvary FC. Personally here, I think Pacific's the better club. They had a really good result against Vancouver FC on the weekend, their second match of the season pretty much. Calvary drew Forge, but I think Pacific, they're still a better club than Calvary. In my book, as I look at it, I think Pacific is better. They're hosting the match. Merriman's a better coach as of now than Wielden is. Merriman just gets more out of his players than Wielden does. Calvary has been very, I would say, stagnant since 2019. I don't think they've ever gotten better. I don't think they've gotten worse. They are what they are, but Pacific has slowly built into a contender in the Canadian Premier League. I got Pacific going to the quarterfinal to face Valor, hosting that quarterfinal match 7 in May, Pacific versus Valor. Next up, the last match of the western side of the bracket to play the winner. The winner of it will play Vancouver in the other quarterfinal in the west. York United FC versus Vancouver FC. The New Boys, Vancouver versus York. Vancouver did lose, but York also lost on the weekend. And even though York is hosting this match, I just have a feeling personally that Vancouver, they've got some good players. They've got some former Pacific players. They've got some local players to the city of Vancouver. Caden Chung went over there. They got a good coach, a better coach than what York has. I personally think Vancouver had a better chance of at least drawing Pacific than York did drawing or winning their game on the weekend. And I think that's going to go into this preliminary round tie. I think Vancouver FC wants to make a great first impression in this tournament, and they will. Vancouver beats York. That may be an upset to some people, but I believe that it'll happen. So which means we get a Vancouver derby in match 8 in the quarterfinals, the defending champions Vancouver Whitecaps will play Vancouver FC at Vancouver FC, by the way. Should be very interesting to see. That'll be cool. So, quarterfinals in the West, in my book, will be Pacific versus Valor at Langford, British Columbia. And then Vancouver FC versus the Whitecaps at Vancouver FC. A little bit confusing, I think, but could get a little bit confusing. But next up, match 4, Forge FC versus FC Laval. FC Laval, the winners of the PLSQ in Quebec. Forge FC, the defending Canadian Premier League champions, 3-time champions now, Forge. Forge is going to beat Laval. They honestly should have beaten Calvary on the weekend. I think a draw is a little bit questionable. I think a draw is a little bit unfair to Forge. Laval, they're a lower-end club against the best Canadian Premier League club, and arguably a team that could be the best club in Canada still, between Forge, Toronto, Montreal, and the Whitecaps. Forge could still arguably be that best club if you wanted to get into the weeds of that discussion, but that's not what we're at right now. Forge FC is just better. Bobby Smirniotis, just like last year in the preliminary round, is going to beat the PLSQ champion and probably dismantle them. Forge wins. Next match, Halifax Wanderers FC versus Atletico Ottawa. Ottawa, the runners-up of the Canadian Premier League last year. Halifax, not good. So I personally think Atletico Ottawa is going to win match 5 and play Forge and host Forge as well for a rematch of the Canadian Premier League final of last year. I think Ottawa versus Forge is just meant to happen. And Ottawa's the better team than Halifax. Halifax, jury's out, okay? I know they've made improvements, but the jury is still out for me personally. But Ottawa is still pushing and still looking good. So for me, it's Ottawa. Then finally, CF Montreal versus Vaughan Azzurri SC. We will be covering that tomorrow as well, live in review. And maybe I'll be watching Forge Laval on the computer as well. We'll find out. But with that being said, Vaughan SC, the champions of League One Ontario. Montreal now fighting for the wooden spoon in MLS after finishing second in the East last year. It's been a teardown for Montreal. Now, do I think that makes them lose to a League One Ontario side? No. Will I laugh at them if it happens? Yes. On camera? Yes. But will it happen? No. I'm not going to, just because I don't like Montreal, and I don't, doesn't mean my hate blinds me to the fact that they probably should win this match. I don't know if it'll be a blowout. I think that maybe 1-0, 2-0, and that's the best they could muster, but they're going to win. Montreal's going to win. I still don't see them losing. That's probably the nicest thing you're going to hear me say about them this year. Montreal beats Vaughan, goes to Toronto to play Toronto in May, early May. So in the East, we got Atletico Ottawa hosting Forge in the second round, the quarterfinal. Toronto hosting Montreal. So Vancouver and Toronto have gotten into the tournament by the quarterfinals. We'll go 7, 8, 9, 10. Pacific FC versus Valor FC. Again, Pacific's just the better team than Valor. Pacific is just better. And a month later from now, they'll have just as good a form. Valor might be playing better, but it's Pacific. Pacific goes to the semifinal. To host, by the way. To host on the island. Vancouver FC versus Vancouver Whitecaps FC. The defending champions come into this tournament not really playing that well in MLS. And had a great win against Real España in Champions League, but then got slapped by LAFC in Champions League. I don't think Vancouver's that good this year. But they're still good enough to beat Vancouver FC. They've played another lower level club and slapped them. they'll probably go over to play Vancouver FC, or when they do go over to play Vancouver FC, they will beat them just like they did Real España. Vancouver Whitecaps FC on their defense goes on to the semifinals. So the semifinal on the Western bracket will be Pacific versus Vancouver Whitecaps. Then we got Atletico Ottawa versus Forge FC, and I think it'll be the same ending as the CPL final last year. Atletico Ottawa will lose to Forge. Forge, again, is just better. Jordan Hamilton already has a goal. Chouanier still there. Becker will be playing back in the team by then. He was suspended for the first game, if I remember correctly. Could have sworn I heard something about that. But again, he'll be in. Jensen looks like a really good prospect this year. Noah Jensen does. Forge is still Forge. Defending champions, I got to give them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe with a rematch, Ottawa feels like they need to do something with it. But again, Forge wins, and they will go to the winner of Toronto versus Montreal in the semifinal. Toronto FC versus CF Montreal. Toronto's a better team this year. They are better than they were last year, and they still slapped Montreal, who ended up finishing second in the semifinal of the Canadian Championship. I think the same here, except a better Toronto will slap a worse Montreal in this quarterfinal at home. 401 derby. In the 401 derby. And personally, I think Toronto 3 or 4-0. I do. Bernardeschi will be firing on all cylinders. Io Akinola will find a way to score a goal. And TFC will just win, blazing to the semifinal to host Forge at the end of May, 23 to 25th. So semifinals, the Western semifinal, who will be the host of the final, Pacific FC versus Vancouver Whitecaps FC. I like Pacific, but they're not going to upset Vancouver again. I like Merriman. I like what Pacific has. But if they were playing Montreal, I could say it's possible that we would have a CPL team in the final. And I'm not saying it's completely out of the realm of possibility, but I think Vancouver Whitecaps will do what they're supposed to do against Pacific. Will it be a hard tie at the Isle Starlight Stadium? Yes, it was last time. Could Vancouver collapse? Yes. Would I be happy if they did again? Yes. Because that means Toronto gets easier final. Yeah, I'm saying it. But Pacific will not beat Vancouver. I think the Whitecaps will do just enough to get back to the final and defend their title once again at BC Place in the final of the Canadian Championship. Then, I already kind of gave this one away, but Toronto FC versus Forge FC at BMO Field, the semifinal on the eastern side. Toronto, if you could beat Montreal, you've beaten Forge before, and you were worse a year before, you're going to win. You're going to win. At home, no less. Better off with Bernardeschi, with Insigne, most likely, with Larea, with Petretta, with Rosted, with Hedges. With K. And Io would probably start up top. But if they go all out, Toronto should win. They go to the final. I like Forge, but not against Toronto. If it was against Montreal, they better win. I think they could, though. Toronto is getting there would be bad for Forge. So the final, as is, Vancouver Whitecaps FC hosting Toronto FC on the 6th to 8th of June, somewhere around there. Toronto versus Vancouver, once again. Can Toronto get their revenge for last year, or will Vancouver retain in a very similar way to last season? Toronto gets their revenge. Toronto FC beats the Vancouver Whitecaps. I still think Toronto's a better club this season than Vancouver is. Both MLS teams that will probably need to beat, or we would possibly have to beat Montreal, then possibly have to beat Vancouver on our way. They're not as good as Toronto this year. I think Toronto, as of now, is the better club than both the Whitecaps and CF Montreal. They are the best MLS Canadian club. And that's just facts. I think Vancouver, you've seen that they just suck unless they play a lower level team, aka Real España, Vancouver FC, or Pacific. If they're playing somebody at their level, they're going to lose. And I think Toronto will remember, because let's remember, Bernardeschi was there, Insigne was there. They're going to remember what happened last year. They're going to remember. And they're not going to let that happen again. They're going to win the Voyageurs Cup. They're going to go back to CCL even before Leagues Cup is needed to be played and playoffs are played. They're going to win the Canadian Championship, go back to CCL, and all's well that ends well. Simple as. Toronto's going to beat Vancouver. They're not going to let happen what happened last year again. It's not going to happen. Simple as. So with that being said, those are my predictions. Toronto FC will lift the Voyageurs Cup once again this year and go back to Champions League as they rightfully should. So, not that hard of a path, but we'll find out. We'll see what happens. So with that being said, if you like this video, like it, share, subscribe. You know what it is. Tell your friends. Hit that like button. Hit that subscribe button. Hit that bell notification once subscribed. Send super chats on the live streams. Comment on this video. Put us in playlist. Share with friends and family. All that great stuff. I will see you tomorrow for a live watch along and review of CF Montreal versus Vaughan Azzurri SC. And we will see who plays Toronto in the quarterfinals of the Canadian Championship. Should be fun to watch. I'm Ryan and I'm out. Peace. Let's go.